Hey there, my name's Steve, and I wanted to make this video just for people that might be questioning their relationship with alcohol. Now, fair warning, I'm going to be reading off a script that I wrote, and it's mostly just because I got 6 pages of information, and I just want to make sure I hit all the points in the order I wanted to and not miss anything. So I'll get to my story in just a minute, but I also want to say that I won't be using the terms, or try not to use the terms, alcoholic or alcoholism, because honestly, not a big fan of them. I know for me, they conjure up the image of the homeless guy with a bottle and a paper bag in one hand and an empty cup begging for spare change in the other, or the person that's hiding bottles of booze around the house and stealing sips, or the person that's really bad and waking up in the middle of the night shaking and full of anxiety until they have a couple sips of off the bottle, get things level again. Alcohol addiction has a lot more faces that aren't that extreme. So while those ones might be the typical looks of addiction, I think it's extremely important to acknowledge that those are just examples of people that are further up the ladder of alcohol addiction. And that's actually how I like to think of this addiction to alcohol, which is an addictive drug. It's a ladder. So you might have one foot on the ladder, you may be halfway up, or maybe you're just looking at the ladder, deciding if you're gonna start making the climb. But make no mistake, if you consume alcohol to any degree, you're on the exact same ladder that the obvious alcoholic is on. Now, I'm not saying if you consume one sip of alcohol that you'll become this full-blown alcoholic. Definitely not saying that. But you have to admit that if you do consume any alcohol to any degree, you have at least one thing in common with that person, the full-blown alcoholic that's had their life implode on them. So the rate at which people consume alcohol lie across a huge array, ranging from the aforementioned full-blown alcoholic to obviously someone that doesn't drink at all. But across from the full-blown is the person who's like the take or leave it. They're the types who have like just one glass of bubbly with at a wedding, for a wedding reception, for a toast, or Christmas Day or something like that. But then they don't think twice about it. They're not pining for drinks or anything like that. And honestly, that's one of the dangers with alcohol. A lot of people have their guard down when they start this journey up the ladder, because they don't acknowledge that drug they're consuming is such a dangerous one. I'm sure most of you can relate with that, because you probably know one of those take it or leave it types. I know I did. For me, it was my grandfather on my mom's side. He'd just have the odd small glass of rosé with a Sunday dinner, or a half ounce of whiskey for a Christmas Eve toast. But then that was it. He lived to be 91, and he passed away from no real underlying health conditions. It was just his time to go. But then on the other hand, a lot of people have the people in their family that consume alcohol regularly. And for me, that stark contrast was my grandfather on my dad's side. He passed away at 71 from cancer, and he was a heavy drinker right up until he died. So obviously, no one starts out drinking alcohol in the alley, living in the streets, or stealing sips of vodka throughout the day in between folding laundry or PTA meetings. But for many people, they get on the ladder, and then the speed at which they head up it is based on a ton of different factors. Most of us start pretty innocently, getting drunk for the first time, just to see what it's like after you witness older people doing it in front of you. For me, I was probably 13 years old. I went to a friend's house during school lunch break, and for some reason we decided to drink a couple of those mini airplane-sized bottles of vodka. In about 15 minutes, we were super drunk. And then not long after that, we puked our guts out, which thankfully, in hindsight, that was a good thing, since throwing up is your body's way of rejecting poison. So that first experience with alcohol didn't create any sort of kid that was looking to get drunk all the time, not even a little bit. I was just your average kid, hanging out with friends, playing sports, playing video games and other stuff like that. I grew older, and high school parties on the weekends started involving alcohol, and really that seemed perfectly normal since I'd seen my parents and older brothers have parties where drinking was involved, and it seemed like they were having a great time. After high school, I went to college, and it was much of the same, really. Drinking on party nights, so mostly Friday and Saturday, and then mixed in the odd Thursday or Wednesday, something like that. And if you happen to puke on those party nights, then that was just a rite of passage. If you felt like a complete bag of crap the next day, that was another badge of honor. All in all, really a pretty twisted sense of accomplishment. But really, all those past experiences, I look on them pretty fondly. Like, there's not any regret there. And I think for that reason, it almost seemingly reinforced my thoughts that there is no issue with alcohol. What followed for me for the next 25 years or so was what most people consider regular drinking. I'm talking about meeting up with friends at a pub for a pint or two, going out for dinner and drinking wine, having people over at the house and having a few drinks, or getting together with my buddies and having lots of drinks. But all in all, pretty tame by most standards, and only the odd time here or there having too many and causing the next day to be a complete write-off. And throughout those 25 years, I achieved a lot. I met my eventual wife while she was attending university, and I happened to be working in a factory. She ended up convincing me to go back to school to get into a career that I actually liked, which I ended up graduating that college program at the top of my class. We had 2 amazing kids. I got a job I love and have since became a part owner in. Literally, I created the best life that I could possibly imagine. But, and of course there's always a but, over the last few years, the pace at which I was ascending that ladder was increasing almost without me even noticing. For a long time, I'd only really drink sporadically, like I mentioned, but then it became one here and there during the week. Then it became 1 every night. Then it became 2 every night. And needless to say, I got to the point where I was drinking every single day. Now, I wasn't getting noticeably drunk every day or anything like that, but I 100% was drinking for effect. And after every drink, I wanted another one. The only reason I didn't have another one was because I was using willpower not to. Now, backing up just to about a year ago, during my regular drinking days, one of my friends sent this article to our messenger group chat, and it was talking about how alcohol is being linked to a bunch of different types of cancer. And that really got me thinking and reflecting about myself and the ways that I had adapted to, especially since my dad had gone through a couple bouts with cancer over the years. But looking back now, I think that's when that seed was planted to question my own alcohol consumption. It sounds stupid to say in retrospect, really, but I honestly never associated anything bad with what's considered that moderate drinking. But after that seed was planted, that really got me thinking about alcohol, and I wanted to do my own research about it. So my research started with listening to an audiobook called Alcohol Explained by William Porter. He was a lawyer from England, and that book was quite good, but it was a bit hard for me to relate to because William's addiction with alcohol was the type where he wouldn't drink at all through the week, but then Friday after work, he would just binge drink right up until Monday morning when he had to go back into work. I just couldn't relate to that. That wasn't how I consumed alcohol. But that aside, that book had a lot of great information, and I'm glad I found it. I do wish he had narrated his audiobook, but I'm sure he had his reasons not to. The second book I listened to, though, was Annie Grace's This Naked Mind. That one came as a suggestion from the audiobook platform Audible that I was using to listening to these audiobooks. And I'm sure it came as a suggestion because I listened to Alcohol Explained. But quite honestly, that book ended up being a life changer. It's seriously an amazing book that opened my eyes to the lies that alcohol had, ingrained in me, and obviously millions of other people. Annie's experience was something that I could totally relate to, because she was a successful business person right up until she quit drinking, which went at her end of her drinking days. She was drinking 2 bottles of wine a night. And I could totally see how I was on that path, just a rung or two down that ladder. And having Annie narrate her audiobook, hearing the passion in her voice that only someone that's climbed that ladder themselves can evoke, that was really powerful. It really made the information sink in. So if you're questioning your own drinking, then you're already made a huge but great first step. The key now, though, is to act on that. And really, it's your instinct that's telling you something's not quite right. Don't get hung up on how much you drink. There's no magic number of how much is good for you to consume or okay for you to consume. I especially hate those articles that every drinker will point out. And you see them on the internet, and it's about how moderate drinking is actually healthier than not drinking. Well, I gotta call BS on that one. And honestly, I'd love for a doctor to look me in the eye and explain to me how drinking ethanol has any benefits for the human body. And yeah, newsflash, if you didn't know this, but the alcohol that's in beer, wine, and liquor is ethanol. If that name sounds familiar, ethanol, that's because it's the same chemical that's in gasoline that we put in our vehicles to power them. And don't take my word for it, though. Read a safety data sheet on ethanol. You certainly won't find any recommendations on how much you should drink of it. You'll see first aid measures on it. So if it's swallowed, you're supposed to drink water, call poison control. If you drink too much, then you have to go to the hospital immediately. There's definitely no daily suggested servings, though. So now that your interest has been sparked, now is the time to take action and feed your brain some information. I could attempt to rehash what Annie and William researched, organized, and wrote out so well, but that would not give you the solid backbone of information that you need to make an informed decision on whether you should drink alcohol or not. But I can tell you that for me, a few days after I finished reading This Naked Mind, that I quit drinking alcohol easily, without one shred of regret or longing or cravings or anything. Heck, it even inspired me to open an e-commerce store selling alcohol-free drinks, just to give people options that are as enjoyable as beverages with alcohol. They just don't have that added, or they have the added perk that they don't contain any poison. So one of the last things I did want to mention, because I feel like it's important to point out, is that I didn't have any sort of rock bottom before I decided to quit drinking. I suppose, thankfully, but I feel it's necessary to point that out, just because a lot of people think that with addictions, people need to hit that rock bottom before they can make a change. And I know personally I've heard that in the past. Well, I'm here to tell you that that theory is complete BS. And honestly, I think that you have to hit rock bottom before you get help is not only flat out wrong, it's dangerous as hell. It leads to people constantly thinking they can get worse. There's always that person that's worse off. Oh, maybe it could get worse. And keep going over that ladder and just fall right off. But honestly, true rock bottom is death. Why would you keep going until you die? There's so much to live for in this world, and there's so much light when you take away alcohol. But once you take in those facts about alcohol, you'll see that there's so many reasons that you shouldn't drink it, and literally 0 reasons why you should. So in closing, I suppose I'd like to challenge you to spend 7 hours and 28 minutes of your life and listen to This Naked Mind. If you sign up for Audible for a free 30-day trial, you get 1 free book credit. If you can use that credit to get This Naked Mind, so the cost to you would be nothing. So think about it, like, what is there to lose? Worst case scenario is you waste, less than 8 hours of your time. That's less than 1/3 of one day. And if you're watching this, I'm sure you have many, many days or hours of drinking alcohol under your belt. So it's worth a try. So yeah, and finally, I guess I feel like I should add that I've not been paid by anybody to mention anything, or any product or anything like that. I just speaking to you from my experience and what helped me, shake off the alcohol monster. And I just genuinely hope that my shared experience helps somebody. All right, take care.